Hey there. Thank you for coming back and for tuning in. Today, I'm speaking with Nick Hoh. He is an innovation design leader with over 25 years of experience driving exceptional customer experiences at companies such as Walmart, Wells Fargo, and Atlassian, where we met. Most recently, he joined SmithRx as a senior design manager to head and lead their design efforts. I was really excited about this conversation and discussion, and I hope you enjoy it. Let's dive in. All right. Hi, Nick. Thank you so much for taking the time and joining me today. I was really excited about this conversation. So thank you for giving us some of your time today.
No problem. I'm very happy to join, and I've been really looking forward to our conversation.
Same here. So maybe before we jump in, it would be great to give us a little bit of introduction and a little bit about yourself and your background, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. No problem. So today I am the senior design manager at a company called SmithRx. We are in the pharmacy benefits management space. And what that means in a nutshell is we're a company that is trying to work within the healthcare system to drive down the costs of, drugs that, you as an individual, as a patient pays for. Because I'm sure you may run into the situation where, depending on who your insurance provider is, the same medication you get with one insurance provider, it could be $5. With another insurance provider, it could be $50. And there's no rhyme or reason why there's a difference. It's just that there's all these middlemen in between that drive the prices up and down, and it varies completely. So at Smith, we're here to sort of drive transparency to the situation, as well as then drive down the costs of those drugs for the end user, working with pharmacies, working with healthcare providers, insurance companies, lots of different customers within that healthcare ecosystem. Prior to Smith, I was with a company called Atlassian in the enterprise software market, which is where you and I got to meet. Led a few different teams there. The last team I led was in the growth area. Before that, I was with Wells Fargo, the bank, working mainly on the consumer and small business side of things. And before that, a company called Atlassian, which is in the mobile insurance space. And then I spent about almost 10 years of my career at Walmart. So I got to do lots of interesting things at Walmart, from helping redesign the site, working on cart and checkout. And Walmart was where I actually transitioned back into a people leadership role. I'd done it much earlier in my career, but I had a really bad experience with it early on. And so I swore off people leadership for about a decade until, things aligned properly at Walmart, and I moved back into it. And prior to Walmart, I just did a bunch of startups.
Awesome. That's a really great experience. And I was one of the lucky ones that worked with you in a project during Atlassian, my time at Atlassian as well. So I know, and I think I mentioned earlier before this call, I did look at your profile, and I know some of your management and leadership value, and it was really curious to maybe know a little bit more about it. If you would like to share, what are these design leadership value, and how do you usually use it in your own career and the teams that you lead and manage?
Yeah, sure. So, you can, like you mentioned, it's on my link. It's on my LinkedIn. It's in my about section. So I'll just read it off. I can't say I've got it all memorized.
Okay.
So So
no worries.
So there's one around customer centricity. As designers, we want to make sure that we're there to represent the customers and make sure, as designers, we're solving customer problems. But the other part of what I think makes for a good designer is that you're also driving a business outcome. So you have to do the two. But in a lot of conversations, you'll get people who will represent the business. As designers, we want to make sure that we're representing the customer in those type of conversations. The other thing I really believe in is diversity and inclusion. And what that means is diversity in a couple senses. One, that you're designing for a diverse audience. Now, of course, you've got to figure out understand who your audience is, and design for the whole breadth of it. So that's one part of diversity and inclusion that I think about. But then there's also in the makeup of a team. As you're building a team, you want to have different perspectives. You want to have different backgrounds, because if you if everyone comes at design from the exact same way, you're going to end up with very much, a very narrow set of options that you can try out or think about. So having a diversity of backgrounds on the team is important. Empowerment and collaboration. Like I'm the type of leader, and I think what makes for great teams is when teams can go out and make decisions, that they're empowered to figure things out on their own. I think my number one responsibility as a leader is to help people be successful, however they define success, right? But I think that's empowering the team as a leader, removing the roadblocks, supporting them to make sure that team members can do their best work. That's important to me. Innovation, continuous improvement, or some people call it a growth mindset. I think that's not specific to design, but I think that's important for design just because of, a lot of designers work in tech environments. And so the pace of change is, it's interesting to think about. Whatever the pace of change we're experiencing now, it's not going to get any slower. It's only going to get faster. So having a growth mindset to be able to think about like, okay, where are the areas I can improve? What can I learn more about? How can I deepen or strengthen my skills? That's an important quality to me and sort of how I think about, growing and building teams. And then the other thing is around sort of along those lines, like if people have a growth mindset and they want to grow, well, part of my responsibility for their success is giving them the right opportunities. So what are those? How can I help team members grow and find those opportunities to, move the needle in their career, give them the right opportunities to learn a different skill or practice or get better in a certain skill. So those are the type of things that are part of my management values that I apply in some way, shape, or form in the different teams I've had the privilege to lead over the years.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. These are really awesome. And I'm a big fan of also, whether you're a leader or a manager or individual contributor, to have some sort of values and a mission to guide you through your career. I think it's really good. And when I saw them, that you already shared them also in your LinkedIn, I was really want to talk about it and kind of adapt some of it, of course, myself and hopefully the audience and everyone listening to us. So maybe moving on a little bit to, I know you joined a new company and a new team you've mentioned with us and shared with us earlier. So would love to get your thoughts about the UX design market and specifically like the job market and in general, like the recent trend. Unfortunately, we've been going through like some layoffs here and there with big tech and there's a lot of unknown around the tech jobs in general, not only UX design, but developers, etc. But what's your thought on that? And maybe like out of curiosity, like if there's anything that we could have done from design teams to kind of either prevent that or what did we, I guess, when did we go wrong? I guess that's what I.
When did we go wrong? That's a loaded question, my friend.
Yeah.
Okay.
It is indeed.
I'll give you my thoughts on it. I think, I don't think this is earth-shattering news, but I think where we went wrong is at different companies, especially those that basically took off during the pandemic. Where we went wrong is we assumed like that growth trajectory would continue on regardless, right? Right. There was the whole when we all started working from home, there were different companies that benefited from that, and I think a lot of businesses made plans or had expectations that, wow, this amazing growth that we have, over this last year or so, this is just going to be the way it is now forever. And that's just not the case, right? Whether it's because now you have some companies that are trying to force return to work, or the fact that, we have new technologies out here like AI that are, changing how teams, work or do their work. I think there were just some unrealistic expectations baked into different companies and different business models, and that the experience we had during that period of time when the pandemic started was just going to be the way it would continue for a long period of time. So I think ultimately that's what got us into trouble, and us being just the tech in other industries as well, but I think definitely tech fell into a lot of that, fell into that bucket.
Totally. I think that totally makes sense. So maybe if you can give us your thoughts about how designers today can differentiate themselves and what they need to do to be competitive in the market we have.
Yeah. And I can share a recent experience being on both sides, both as a job seeker and as a hiring manager.
Yeah.
So how to differentiate yourself, I think now as a designer, and this is dating myself a little bit, but I think one of the big changes when I look, just say like over the last 10 years or so, I think designers today, there's an expectation that you do have to, you're not just trying to solve customer problems, but you do have to understand the business outcomes you're trying to drive and bake that into your design process. And what I mean by that is, okay, what are the metrics that you're trying to move in your given project? And how do you use that to help you do things like, okay, you think of the double diamond, right? You diverge. How do you, knowing that what the metric is that you're trying to move, how does that help you converge? How do you narrow down on a particular, either opportunity or a particular concept that will solve that problem, right? You've got to, as designers nowadays, we really have to take that into account and use that in our design process itself. That's one thing I think that designers do need to show and differentiate themselves. And I know that's been more the case, but as a hiring manager right now, going through it, it's still the case where that doesn't quite come through in a lot of applications. The other thing that I would say from now as a hiring manager, what I see come through is, yes, I think everyone has gone through some sort of case study or portfolio class. Yeah. But the things that I guess aren't being taught in those classes and what differentiates a good sort of case study or portfolio is help me understand why you made the decisions you did. Everyone already has a case study that shows I did user research. I may or may not have come up with a persona. I've done some sort of user interviews. I helped figure out what the problems are, but tell me the story that actually connects the dot. What drives me nuts is someone writes up a case study and says like, yes, I did this research and I created this persona, but I don't see how you used it at all in the rest of your process. And so to me, that's a complete waste of time. And I hate wasting time. A waste of time, meaning that you spent all that effort to do this, but you never used it anywhere else. Yeah. So to me, it's a waste.
Totally. If I can add to that, also sharing your failures. I think a lot of us designers don't really like to share our failures or don't talk about it, but it is part of the process. And like you said, it could be part of the story, and it shows how many other ideas and tries and concepts that you have done and you went through to get you there. But yeah, I totally agree with your point. It's more personalization of your portfolio and showing not only your personality, but the little detail that you went through to get or to take from the research to the design. A lot of designers, I don't want to say lack of it in the portfolio, but then our portfolios becomes like just all look alike. And there's no personalization of the problem and the challenge itself. So.
Oh yeah, for sure. Because that's, as a hiring manager, quite honestly, I'm trying to crawl into your head a little bit to understand why you made the decisions you did. And so even if it's just like a quick, I got this feedback and then this is how I actioned on that feedback. And this is how I changed my design. Like that's the golden nugget to me, because then I can get a sense like, okay, you got this is what you did. I can see that. Right. But without that, like I'm kind of guessing. And so and the way that I operate, if I have to guess or I'm unsure, then I'm not going to move someone forward. Like anyone I move forward in the process, in a sort of a hiring process, I want to feel really good about that. I feel like, yes, they are the right person. I don't want any doubts.
Yeah. Just out of curiosity also, because I know you have amazing experience working at bigger companies and enterprise companies, but also now like taking like the jump into like a relatively a smaller company or a startup. Like what would be different, at least from your perspective? Like how would you approach like design thinking and the customer-centered approach differently between an enterprise team that you're building or you're working and leading and maybe leaner, smaller team in a startup where you are now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the main things that I see being different is, at bigger companies that might have, fairly large design organizations, like when we're at Atlassian, right? It's a 10,000 person company, of which there were anywhere from like 500-600 designers. So design as a practice was pretty well understood. And so when and where you involve design was pretty well understood. There was like, okay, you're about to go into discovery. Designers have to be part of it. I think with startups, there just might not be as much of an understanding of when the right time is to involve design. They know they'll need design before they hand off to engineering, but how far up do you involve design? And when we think about user research, I think a lot of smaller companies might understand usability testing, which is definitely a form of user research, but that might be the only thing that they're exposed to, versus like doing discovery type of user research, where in that sense, you're doing user research to uncover what the business opportunities might be. So I think it's just with smaller companies, they might not quite understand where design can really help out, not just with, getting stuff ready for dev to work on, but even shaping what the opportunity is, identifying what the right opportunity a company or a product should be going after. I think that's to me, the biggest difference between, say, a smaller company versus a larger company where you've had, design is built in as part of the product development process from the get-go.
I'm excited to share with you today my new book, The Design Container. I'm proud to see that Amazon marked it as the #1 new release in user experience and usability within the first few days of its release. The core idea behind the book and framework is to create containers, clearly defined spaces that foster innovation and creativity. Within these containers, teams have the freedom to innovate and experiment, but their work must align with broader organizational goals, strategic objectives, and of course, user needs. The Design Container book details my framework for effectively managing complexity in SaaS product design and development, especially in tech startups where agility, creativity, and alignment are key to success. I would love to hear your thoughts and feedback on the book and the framework, so please get your copy today using the link in the description below. Yeah, that totally makes sense. So maybe advice also, as you went through it recently from a leadership perspective, but for individual contributor and designer perspective too, what would be your advice for someone who's moving from a bigger company to a smaller company, or to a startup from a design perspective as a designer, or even as a founder of a company from a design background? Like, what would be your advice to them of how to approach this new challenge and how it would be different?
Yeah. So yeah, I'll just share with you my own, career path. So actually before I joined Smith, I was actually working on my own venture. It's a company called GlueSense. It's in the longevity health space. I started doing it with a buddy of mine, Tony. We're both very interested in longevity health, and trying to figure out how can we help people live healthier for longer. And before that, that's when I was at Atlassian. So I went from Atlassian, 10,000 person company, to working on my own thing, where it was me and my buddy Tony, to now at Smith, which, we're, for a startup, we're Series C, we're about, 600 odd people. So we're pretty good size.
Series C is almost not a startup anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the transition to it and why I made the choices I did. So I left Atlassian, part of it, and because I wanted to start BlueSense with Tony, because we were just really passionate about, like, can we build a product in this space, in the longevity health space, where he and I were both really interested in it outside of work already. Like we had talked about, like, hey, we both had tried like these continuous glucose monitors that monitor your blood glucose levels, and neither of us are diabetic or pre-diabetic, but we just thought it's interesting data that you can use to help, you know, your long-term health. And so just moving into that, making that change was really, I can't say it was necessarily around design, but it was just more what I wanted to do with my career at that point. And then even moving from GlueSense, going to now Smith, I made the move because, again, I wanted to still continue to work on something where I can make the world a better place in some way, shape, or form. And Smith's mission just aligns with that. And then I saw, like, hey, I did some research, talked to some people. It's actually, you know, it's a really interesting environment, and it met sort of what my needs were in terms of what I could help a company with, and what I'm bringing to Smith, and what we needed was a leader just to help a company scale in terms of, like, we're going from servicing employers that might have 0 to 1,000 or 5,000 employees, but we want to grow and build products that can scale to 50,000 employees. So scaling a design that goes from like 0 to 5,000 to 0 to 50,000, there's a lot of work that's involved, and that's the stuff I like. That's the stuff I've done in the past, and so it's just meeting the right needs for me from a career standpoint. So quite honestly, it was less about what my needs were as a designer, but just more around my career. But to try to go back and answer your question, like, as a designer transitioning through a 10,000 company to a 2-person company to, you know, a 600-person company, I think the things to think about is, like, yes, in a bigger company, you're not going to have to wear that as many hats. Like in Atlassian, if you're a designer, you're a designer. When you're a founder or co-founder of the company, you're a designer. You're the social media manager. You are a biz dev. You just got to be comfortable wearing different hats. And then now moving over to Smith, I think part of it is you might be also having to be a designer primarily, but also be an evangelist, which is different than at a large company. Like I said, Atlassian, design was very much an understood commodity, so there wasn't a lot of evangelism we had to do. At Smith, I think we get design the value, but I think part of my role is, again, evangelizing, helping explain, like, other ways that we might not have realized design can help in the product development process, or as we're thinking about business strategy. So those are some of the things I think as a designer you can think about going through those different sizes of companies.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I would like to also point out, like, I think there's a really good thing that you mentioned, or you briefly touched on, is you started your venture because you were really passionate about this idea and to make a difference, building something around the idea. And best startups, of course, it starts with that. You have to be passionate about the idea, otherwise you're probably not going to follow through with it. But then also when you made the team and the company at Smith, like, they aligned with your value and you really felt for their mission. So just want to point out that as well, like, how important the passion is, and also the mission and your own value, to make sure when you start with a new company or a team that they align with your value. So it's not only you're coming to the company, just, of course, we all, at the end of the day, we need to pay the bills, but but having that value, I think it's good for whatever you do, like from a passion project or a venture to the new team or company you'll start with. So just wanted to point that out. I think it's really awesome that you mentioned it. So maybe piggyback on the startup word and how, I guess you talked about, like, you're passionate about the idea of the venture that you started. You wear multiple hats. Like, how did your background in design helped you, or helped to bring this idea to light, and how can you utilize it to build ventures or build companies? If you're as a designer, you want that.
Oh yeah, no, it was a big help. So initially, when Tony and I started GlueSense, we thought we wanted to build a glucose monitoring app, or something that is going to check out whatever your blood glucose levels are. So what do I do as a designer? First thing, I got to do some user research. You need to understand, like, okay, what are the problems that people are having? Is there something that we can build a product around? And I feel very, very blessed that Tony, my co-founder, was very open to it. Like, his background is in engineering, mine is more design. So we have complementary skills, but he was game to do some user research, to let's try to figure this out. And so we talked to customers, specifically customers who stopped using a continuous glucose monitor for and to try to understand why they did. And so we did the research. We talked to a number of people, and we found out, like, some people churned because it was too expensive. Because if you don't have a prescription, it can be a couple $100 a month. So it's not no small amount of money. Some people churned because they got the information they needed and they didn't want to do it anymore. But by doing that research, we realized, for the problems that are currently those users face, we just personally weren't interested in trying to build a product or service in that area. So by doing the research, that helped us understand not the right thing for us. But when we did the research, we learned, like, there might be something further up the funnel that's more interesting to us. So then we did another round of research and user interviews to talk to customers who weren't using a continuous glucose monitor. They were just trying to figure out what the right next step is in their health journey. And so by then talking to those customers, that's when we felt like, there's something here that we care about, that we can see as a customer problem, and we think we can build a business around. And so that's bringing those user research skills as a designer, help us figure out and pivot, quite drastically from where we initially started to the product that we eventually launched, and is still, Tony is still working on today. So I think that's a great way that, as a designer, you can help build your own company, figure out what are the right problems you should be tackling, because based on talking to customers, what are those customer pain points? So
that's awesome. I think that's a great example, and thank you for this. Is like a case study in its own on how to and why you should do research, especially in a startup environment when it's hard, and most founders who are not coming from a design background, they may skip certain steps thinking that is not as important. But the search part of it, no matter how big or small it is still very important of the process. So piggyback on that, I mean, again, don't want to keep talking about the startup ideas, but how would, I guess, working with in a different environment, of course, in a different size of a team, like, will get you to adapt certain ways of doing the process, or getting the process to fit into the environment that it's in. So I guess my question is, like, what would you recommend for someone who's a one-person designer in a startup or founded a company themselves? Like, how you balance that? Like, how much would you do from the design process that is valuable and important, and how much you can also manage the balance between being really quick and, as you want to do, building an MVP and getting something out there to get feedback. Like, what would you advise on balancing both speed and process?
Quite honestly, I think it depends on where are you in that just whole product development process. So give you the example. So like I mentioned, at GlueSense, we're trying to figure out what is the right product that we should build. So if you think of the design process, like, that's the user research. So I spent basically all my time figuring out, like, okay, how do I create the plan? What are the right customers we should talk to? How do I screen them? How do I find them? Like, we needed to answer that question first and foremost, right? Because that's where from a product development standpoint. We need to figure out what we were going to even think about building and why we wanted to go after that. But once we had identified it, okay, here's the problem we're trying to solve. Here's now the business outcome we think we want to drive with it, and here's who our audience is. Okay, now I'm gonna quickly iterate, like, all right, on the product design itself. And so what we were doing, we were building these social media posts. So part of it is like, okay, how do we get the information for these posts? How do I, source images and all that stuff? But there it's sort of, okay, now I'm just iterating how I can build the product, and quite honestly, build it efficiently, because I know who how much social media posting you're having to do, but that stuff takes time, right? To find the right images, to find the right, to write the right things. Even with using things like ChatGPT, it still takes some time. So part of it was like, okay, this is the product that we're building. So now this is where I'm trying to invest and still figure out how do we work efficiently so we can get something out there to get that first bit of feedback there. And so the way that Tony and I work was more or less in 1 week sprints. We'd basically align on what the goal would be for that week. And we would talk because it was just two of us, every day we would talk like, okay, here's what I'm trying to accomplish today. And then we could always tie it back to, okay, what's the overall goal for the sprint? And then just keep ourselves accountable to that. But we spending that little bit of time planning saves you a lot of pain later on. Like I'm always a big proponent of, a little bit of planning time will help you, whether you're designing a product, whether you're trying to build a company, whether you're just, anything, just, trying to find your next role. If you spend a little bit of time up front figuring out what your goals are, what are you trying to accomplish, that'll just make everything so much easier down the road.
That's great. And I think maybe adding to that as well, like getting comfortable. I mean, I was guilty of that. Getting comfortable with designing in public concept and the product, building product and building startups in public. And I think it's a term used recently, designing in public, becoming more familiar and more acceptable to kind of get quick feedback and iteration. So maybe what's your take on that? Or what's your advice to designers who think of design need to be more valued, or they need to hone their craft and add more time into it before they start sharing? Like, what's the best approach to that, and advice to the designer that they're not comfortable with that?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's even before, like, I totally get, like, yes, I know one of the hot terms is design, building in public, but same thing, right? Same thing before, right? I think even for designers, I think before, like in the early 2000s, you'd have like designers going off into their own little corner, designing everything down to pixel perfect, and then coming back up for air and saying like, hey, I've designed everything now, right? Yeah. The way that we need to work is you want to get feedback early and often. So even if it's just a sketch, if you bring out a sketch and say like, hey, this is what I think I think we're building, these are my ideas, what do you think? It's a much lower cost to even get to that point. It's a much easier way at times for people to give feedback, because one of the things I've noticed over the years is that, when you have that fully fleshed out pixel perfect mock-up, there are some people that think like, oh my God, you spent so much time on it. If I give you feedback, it's just you've wasted all this time. And so sometimes they might hold back on things. And so just like get that feedback as quickly as possible. I think as designers, feedback is a gift, right? And I'm not saying that you have to act on every single piece of feedback you get. Part of what our responsibility is as a designer is to know when to act on what feedback, but always be able to tell the feedback giver what you're going to act on, what you're not, and why. All right. So building in public is basically, same thing. You're just trying to get feedback as quickly as possible. The only caveat I have to building in public is that you still need to make sure it is valuable and usable to your customer.
Yeah.
Right? You can, there's companies that sort of have thrown stuff out there, but when someone actually uses it, it's just completely buggy, right? That's not going to give you as the founders or the product team really great feedback if people can't see past your bugs. They can't give you feedback on what the actual product is, the value of the product, if you're releasing a buggy product. So building in public, totally support. I think there still has to be a certain quality, whether bar that has to be met from a product, from a design, from the experience side. So all for it. Still just have to make sure it's still meeting your new users' needs in the first case.
Yeah, that's totally right. And it'll go back to the point that you mentioned, like you have to also, with experience and what you're building, know which feedback you take and you actually act upon, and other feedback that you maybe need to ignore or explore more, or just have it as a in the background for later. So that's experience you get good by time. So just really want to thank you again. It's always a pleasure to catch up with you. Like, hopefully you can come back in future videos and talk more and chat more if you would like to. But I really appreciate your time, and thank you for being here with me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation today, man.
Same here. Absolutely. Thank you for everyone who's watching, and we'll see you in the next one.